If you've been getting destroyed by Genji, Sombra, Winston, D.Va, or just any other dive hero in the game, then you've come to the right place. In this video, we'll be going over which heroes you can pick today to help play around enemy dive comps and things that you're going to need to do on those heroes to make it work. But if you want tips and guides for just about everything Overwatch related, make sure that you head over to the GameLeap website right now. You can sign up right now and get access to all different kinds of guides just like this one to help you rank up starting today. We're releasing new guides daily and are sure to have something that will help you improve. First, let's get into the tanks. Whenever you're facing dive as a tank player and your team isn't playing dive themselves, you have a few different options. The number one best tank going against dive is going to be D.Va. With D.Va, you have some of the best mobility in the game. So no matter where your DPS or supports are playing, you can easily get to them and fend off the enemy dive heroes in a matter of seconds. This, combined with her defense matrix, which you should be using on any teammate that is actively being focused by the enemies, should easily help you fight off any dive comp. An easy tip with D.Va is that whenever you're facing an enemy Winston or any other hero like Winston that jumps in, you can boop them out of their jump towards your team with your boosters. It's as simple as watching for the Winston to jump and then flying directly into him with your boosters, making sure that it boops him back and stops his forward momentum, completely destroying his dive. This can easily save your supports or DPS in almost every situation that Winston jumps in, and you should be doing it whenever you possibly can. Zarya is also another strong hero versus dive. She doesn't have the mobility that D.Va does, but she has long-range defensive abilities with her bubbles that can save her teammates really easily. Being able to sustain your DPS or support players whenever they're in trouble can easily be the difference between them escaping or eliminating the enemy, and that can win you the fight alone. Whenever you're playing Zarya versus dive, you should always be trying to save at least one bubble so that you can use it on teammates in danger. You can get your energy from these teammates whenever they take the brunt of the damage after they're being dove. You don't always need to use your bubbles on yourself to gain energy, especially if your teammates are being focused more than you. Speaking of energy, Zarya does an incredible amount of damage with high energy. So as long as you're turning around to help your team whenever they're getting dove, you'll get a bunch of free all charge on the enemy DPS and tanks while just completely eliminating them and saving your teammates. You can also use her ultimate on diving enemies to actually group the enemies up. Say a Winston and a Genji dive, you can get yourself 2 free eliminations on those two while they're split from their team, as well as positioning yourself in between those enemies and their supports so that you can block the healing on them. Some notable mentions for the tanks include Erisa and Sigma. Erisa can be good against dive as she can eat projectiles and body block for her teammates as well as pushing enemies away from her, but she doesn't have a ton of mobility, so you actually have to be positioned closer to your team if you're facing dive in that situation. Similarly to Erisa, Sigma is really only good if he's positioned close to his supports and DPS that are getting dove. His rock is a great way to actually stop enemies from using their key abilities when they're diving, and his eating ability is really short range and needs to be in front of or on top of his teammates to actually eat the damage. This means that if you're not positioned close enough to your team, you're probably not going to be doing anything against that dive comp. His shield can also be used really well against dive if he properly positions it. This means that putting it near your support so that they can run back and forth through it, allowing them to mitigate some of the damage that's coming towards them from the dive. Alright, now on to the DPS. The first hero I want to go over is Bastion. Bastion is only really strong versus dive if he has some type of support. He's a really easy dive target because he has almost no mobility, but if he has any sort of support, whether it's just the Zarya bubble, a Mercy pocket, or even a Kiriko cleanse, all Bastion needs to do when he's dove is transform and fight back. You can easily shred the enemy tank/dive heroes if you're a smart Bastion player. Speaking of being smart with Bastion, you also need to position smart. You can easily position a short distance away from your team, but not far enough so that the enemies can solo you out, while your team is waiting to be dove, and the enemies are probably going to dive the bulk of your team, or at least your supports that are playing near your team. You can either wait hiding or just wait a short distance away and then immediately transform as soon as the enemy tank dives in to shred them as they're not looking. Next up, Mei is a really strong pick against dive heroes. She has a 3-second invincibility that can allow all of her teammates to group up around her if she gets dove herself, and her wall ability can easily allow you to block off enemy supports from their divers, similar to how Zarya would. She also has AoE damage with her primary fire and slowing with it, making it so that your teammates can easily just walk away from any dive heroes that are on them. Her wall is also a really good tool for stopping and splitting up the enemies that are diving her teammates, making it so that they can more easily survive and sustain against the dive. And finally, her ultimate is really good. If the enemies use their movement abilities to actually get to you or your teammates, just throw it at their feet and watch them all freeze. Reaper is another really strong hero versus dive. His invincibility allows him to easily escape, similar to Mei if he gets dove, and similar to Bastion, Reaper can play an off angle or a hidden position, waiting for his teammates to get dove so that he can either teleport in or just walk in or drop from above and then start blasting the enemy tank. Reaper's shotguns are very close range and excel against any enemy that needs to be up in your face to deal damage. This is why he's super good against heroes like Winston and D.Va and any other dive tank or DPS that is going to have to get into your support's face. With his lifesteal, even if Reaper gets dove, he can just focus down the enemy tank and heal himself back up until his Wraith form comes up, or he can just Wraith form away if things get scary. And just like Mei's ultimate, his ultimate is also really strong versus dive, where if the enemies use their cooldowns to get to you or to your team, there's almost nothing they can do to get away from your ultimate if you use it right on top of them. Next up, Soldier 76 can be a good hero against dive, but you have to be smart with him. His sprint can allow you to escape just about any bad situation, but if you position yourself close enough that the enemies can dash through you and deal damage instantly, then you're probably just gonna die running away or before you can run at all. The beauty of Soldier 76 is in the initial positioning where you can see dive coming from far away or see that Genji walking towards you or see the monkey positioning to jump at you. Then you can simply run away to a spot where the enemies either have to waste too many resources to dive you or they have to walk past your team to get to you. This means that they're going to either have to dive your teammates or not dive at all. That's when you can just sit from afar, walk closer to your team as the enemies start to dive, and deal damage to just about anybody that shows up on your screen. Tracer, while great at diving, is also great at defending against dive. Being a very slippery hero, she can easily play similar to Reaper, where if she sees a dive coming, she can position out of sight and then engage on the enemies that are focused on her team. This allows you to easily rack up damage on unsuspecting enemies, and with her pulse bomb, you can easily finish off the enemy tank or burst them down before they kill one of your supports. Speaking of supports, our next hero is Baptiste. Baptiste is very strong versus dive because of his passive mostly, but his other two abilities can easily help you sustain versus dive if you're in a pinch. His passive allows him to charge up his boots when crouching and use the jump key to jump super high into the air with no cooldown attached. With this in mind, whenever you're playing Baptiste, you always want to stay crouched and play on a low ground near a high ground that you can jump up onto. If you get dove, all you have to do is simply jump to the high ground, and if you get chased, jump off and then jump right back up. Or you can jump up onto multiple different levels of high grounds, just continuously running away from the enemies. Baptiste can escape almost any enemy dive hero without any issue at all. The only one that gives him trouble is going to be D.Va because her fly is on a very short cooldown, as well as being able to chase him whenever he jumps. Even if somebody does chase him as he jumps up, he has two really strong abilities to help him sustain. His regen burst can give him instant health for whenever the enemies initially dive and deal all of their damage, and his immortality field can stop him from any big damage or stop him from dying entirely. While his ultimate isn't great against dive, it can be used to help your teammates sustain against dive if you're positioned correctly. Kiriko is probably the best hero against and with dive. This is because she has a teleport and a cleanse that makes teammates invincible. Similar to D.Va, Kiriko can be at any of her teammates almost instantly. This makes diving Kiriko nearly impossible, and if you try and dive one of her teammates and she's already nearby, she will just heal them and cleanse them from any debuff effects, making them invincible for 1 second. Kiriko's only weakness is if she teleports into a dive situation to save her teammates. Then she will be more vulnerable, making it difficult for her to escape with her life if she has no other support. Her ultimate is also really great against dive, defensively and offensively, making it usable whenever her team gets dove or whenever her team is diving in. Our last hero on today's list is going to be Lucio. This one is actually probably the best hero against dive, kinda next to Kiriko, but it's definitely a debate. Lucio's whole kit is really good at not only escaping dive, but also to help your teammates escape dive. First, Lucio's wall ride allows him to get away from just about any hero in the game super easily due to the movement speed as well as the vertical mobility it gives. Second, his AoE healing and speed ability can easily thwart almost any dive comp. The hardest part about using these is which one you want to use first and which one you want to amp. You usually want to start by amping your heals first, then you can switch to speed about halfway through to get your team away. This is because most of the time when enemies dive, they're going to be dealing most of their damage up front, so they're going to try and burst your team down. That's why you want to amp your heals to sustain them before swapping to speed to get them away from the enemies. Once they're at a safe distance, then you can swap back to healing and fully heal them up if your other support is not alive. Also, similar to D.Va, you can easily boop enemies that are jumping at your team or diving your team with your secondary fire. You can simply use it against a Winston jumping in or that Genji who just dashed into your Ana and easily save their life. In the comments, I want you guys to tell me which heroes that you enjoy playing against dive. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.